Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going straight into a core concept in martial arts,
Oh, yeah.
the down block.
Seems basic, right?
Yeah, get ambarai in karate, for example. Pretty
I-
fundamental stuff.
Exactly. But we're looking at some material today, excerpts from Rick Clark's 75 Down Blocks Refining Karate Technique.
75. Wow. Okay, so he obviously thinks there's more to it than just, blocking low.
That's the whole point. It suggests this single movement holds, well, surprising depth.
Right. I mean, you see it everywhere. Karate, taekwondo, various kung fu styles. It pops up constantly.
And the book uses this great analogy. Think about a chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like something to sit on?
Yeah. You have the idea of a chair, but then you have bar stools, recliners, office chairs, camping chairs.
Uh-huh. Different forms, different specific functions, but all clearly chairs.
Precisely. Clark argues the down block is like that archetypal chair. The execution might look different across styles, but the fundamental concept is recognizable. So this book isn't just showing one way to do it, it's exploring the archetype through, well, 75 applications.
Exactly. It takes common attacks, kicks, wrist grabs, punches, even stick attacks, and shows how you can apply that down block movement in self-defense.
And are they all distinct techniques?
Well, some might look similar, but the book emphasizes the nuances, the subtle differences in application, depending on the specific attack.
Interesting. How's the material structured?
Part 1 sort of lays out the author's philosophy, his approach.
Okay.
Then Part 2 is the main course, 12 sections, broken down by attack type.
And within each section?
That's where you get the different bunkai, the interpretations.
Yeah.
4 to 8 for each attack type, explaining how the down block works in that context.
Okay, so the practical meaning behind the movement, yeah. Decoding the kata.
You got it. So our mission today really is to move past seeing the down block as just that simple downward sweep.
Right, to uncover the layers.
Yeah, explore its deeper significance, the huge range of self-defense uses, and show how one core move can be incredibly adaptable.
So the listener gets a richer feel for martial arts principles and maybe some practical ideas too.
Exactly. So let's start with why this deep dive into fundamentals is important. The book touches on kata and bunkai.
Ah, yes, the forms and their applications. Big topic. Masters like Funakoshi were very clear on this.
What was his take?
He saw kata not as like dance routines, but as ways to remember self-defense techniques. Real techniques encoded in the movements.
So just mimicking the form isn't enough?
Not even close, according to him. If you don't understand the purpose, the bunkai, you're missing the essence of karate-do. It's like saying words without knowing their meaning.
Makes sense. And Funakoshi also said something about the sheer number of kata, didn't he?
He did. He felt that despite seeming like hundreds of different forms, they were mostly variations on a few core techniques.
So understand one deeply.
And you start to see the essential points in others. It unlocks things.
Which is fascinating when you hear someone like Agami, a senior student of
Yeah.
Funakoshi.
Yeah. What did he say?
He admitted that even he didn't always fully grasp why certain variations existed in the kata.
Wow. So even for top students, the deeper layers weren't always obvious or explicitly taught.
Seems that way. It suggests a certain depth that maybe required dedicated exploration.
Which brings us right back to the down block.
Exactly. The book points out it's in pretty much all kata, across different stances.
Its ubiquity is striking, isn't it?
It strongly suggests the old masters saw it as absolutely fundamental, a key building block.
Right. And the book's premise is that by really digging into the Bunkai of just this one move,
Exploring all those 75 potential applications.
you can gain a much deeper understanding of your whole art. It strengthens your practice because you're not just doing the motion, you're understanding its potential.
But it makes you wonder, if it's so fundamental, why isn't the deep bunkai always common knowledge? The book gets into some historical reasons for that.
Ah, the history. Yeah, that often explains a lot. Secrecy was a big factor, wasn't it?
Definitely. Keeping advanced knowledge restricted was, well, kind of common practice historically.
To maintain authority, maybe? Keep the secrets with the higher ranks?
That seems to be part of it. Think about feudal Japan. Commoners couldn't easily own weapons, and knowledge of fighting techniques was often similarly controlled. Jiu-jitsu teachings were notoriously secretive.
Right. Instructors might hold back the really effective stuff, the real secrets, even from their own students.
Yeah, maybe only showing the deepest levels after years of loyalty and proven dedication.
You see that pattern elsewhere too. Like in Aikido, the Kaishiwaza, the reversals often are reserved for high-ranking black belts.
Or traditional jiu-jitsu, where knowledge of vital point striking atemiwaza was definitely not something taught to beginners.
Super sensitive stuff. And sometimes it was kept within national or ethnic lines, too.
The book mentions Ushiba, the founder of Aikido, supposedly having texts marked not to be shown to non-Japanese.
And you hear stories, whether true or not, about Western practitioners maybe not getting the real secrets of jujitsu initially, that kind of thing.
So a culture of keeping knowledge close. Then there's the whole Budo versus Jutsu shift.
Ah, yeah, the evolution from pure combat arts, the jutsu,
Like Kenjutsu, sword fighting for war.
to the Budo forms, which focus more on spiritual development, physical discipline, character building.
Like Kendo from Kenjutsu, or Judo from Jujutsu.
Exactly. And when the focus shifts away from pure life or death combat, some of the more dangerous or, let's say, esoteric techniques might get de-emphasized. They don't fit the new do or way quite as well.
Plus, Westernization played a role in Japan.
Huge role. Late 19th century, Japan's rushing to modernize its military, adopting Western methods.
So traditional martial arts kind of got sidelined.
In some ways, yeah, but then new forms emerged or old forms were adapted, emphasizing discipline and fitness for the general population, fitting into this modernizing society.
And then they started getting taught in schools.
Right. First in Okinawa, early 1900s, then mainland Japan. And putting martial arts into schools meant simplification was necessary.
For safety, obviously, and to teach large groups of kids.
Absolutely. You can't teach complex, potentially lethal techniques to school children en masse. Think of Kano developing judo for education, or Itosu creating the Kata series in karate.
They were designed for broader consumption, essentially.
Yeah, standardized, safer, focused on physical development and discipline. So you combine that historical secrecy, the shift from jutsu to budo, and putting it in schools.
And you can see how the commonly taught bunkai for something like a down block might become, well, simplified or generalized over time.
But the depth is still there to be found, which is what Clark's book seems to be exploring.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. The book brings up Pareto's law.
The 80-20 rule. Interesting application. How does it relate?
Well, first it looks at motivation. Many people start martial arts for self-defense, right?
Yeah, it's a primary driver for sure.
But statistically, the actual chance of the average person facing serious violent crime is, thankfully, relatively low.
It's a sobering statistic sometimes. The book quotes figures suggesting only a small percentage experience violent assault.
So while self-protection is a valid reason to start, the frequency of needing it might be less than we sometimes imagine.
Okay, so that's the motivation side. How about training?
That's where the 80-20 rule really kicks in. If self-defense is a goal, focus your training on the most likely attacks.
Makes sense. Don't spend all your time on defending against obscure attacks you'll probably never see.
Right. And the book cites law enforcement data, which is kind of surprising.
How so?
It shows a really high percentage of physical confrontations involve grabs, pushes, shoves.
More than punches and kicks, really.
Apparently so. Grabs seem to be statistically more common in many real-world encounters than purely striking attacks.
Huh. That's counterintuitive. You'd think punches would be number one.
Me too. So the book details common grabs, single wrist grabs, same side cross hand, double wrist grabs, upper arm, lapel grabs, grabs from behind.
All the usual suspects.
And common punches too, of course, jabs, hooks, uppercuts, mostly aimed at the head or torso.
So the 80-20 application is focus your training time on defenses against these common attacks. The 20% of attacks that cause 80% of the problems.
Pretty much. Train efficiently. Use your limited time to get good at handling the most probable threats.
And it also applies to learning faster. Learn from your peers, your seniors, mentors.
Yeah.
Leverage their experience.
Be strategic. Focus on the high probability stuff.
Yeah.
Which leads nicely into another key concept, taking the initiative, or sen.
Ah, sen. Crucial in martial arts. Timing and initiative.
The book breaks it down into 3 types. First is go no sen.
Go no sen. After the attack, right. Reacting once they've started.
Yeah. And the book points out this is tough. Reaction time is always a factor, especially up close.
That 6-foot rule, cops talk about the distance needed just to react to a sudden knife attack, for instance. It's hard to catch up once they're already moving.
Then there's sen no sen.
Simultaneous action, acting as they launch their attack.
Requires really quick reflexes, but also reading the signs, right?
Definitely. Reading pre-attack cues, body language, tension, facial expression, verbal threats. All those signals that an attack is imminent.
Like a flushed face, clenched jaw, aggressive posture.
Exactly. You see it coming and move with their initiation.
And the third type.
Sensen no sen. This is the most advanced, often translated as before the attack or preemptive action.
So acting even before they physically start moving, how does that work?
It's about recognizing even subtler cues. Intent. Reading their posture, their gaze, maybe a slight weight shift that telegraphs what they're about to do.
Understanding likely attacks based on how they're standing or moving.
Right. And you act in that tiny window between their mental decision to attack and the physical action starting. It's incredibly fine timing.
Anticipation and interception.
But the book adds a caution here.
Which is?
With sen no sen, because you're acting before the obvious physical attack, an untrained observer might see your defensive action as the first aggression.
Ah, yeah. Legal implications. Self-defense versus assault. Tricky territory.
Very. It highlights the complexity of real-world situations.
Okay, so should we get into some of the actual techniques the book describes?
Let's do it. This is where we see the down block morph into all those variations. The book covers defenses against kicks first. Technique 1 is the basic block.
The textbook Gedanberei.
Yeah, but the book immediately says, okay, that has flaws.
It's often too static, maybe.
Yeah.
Doesn't deal with the attacker's momentum well.
Exactly. So Technique 4 offers an alternative. It adds body movement sidestepping off the line.
Evasion. Crucial.
Combines it with a deflecting chambering motion of the blocking arm, and adds a leg scoop.
To unbalance them or take them down. Much more dynamic.
Totally. It shows blocking isn't just about stopping something, it's about redirecting, evading, and countering. Then wrist grabs. Lots on these. Seam side grabs first.
Okay, what kind of down block variations appear here?
All sorts. Using wrist rotations to peel the grip off. Hitting pressure points like lung 7 on the forearm.
Specific targets. Nice. Elbow strikes, fist strikes, using body shifting for leverage, applying wrist locks. All stemming from that basic downward motion, but adapted.
So it's not just blocking down, it's using that path of movement to strip a grip or set up a lock or create an opening to strike.
Precisely. And the details is impressive explaining the biomechanics of targeting. Then, cross-hand wrist grabs.
Similar principles, I assume.
Yeah, but different angles. Techniques involve pulling back sharply, striking their forearm, using the down block with a reverse punch simultaneously,
Countering immediately.
rotating your arm to apply pressure, maybe on the neck, using circular motions to set up locks or throws.
It's really unpacking the versatility of that arm movement. What about double wrist grabs? Those can feel pretty controlling.
Yeah, the book has techniques involving sharp body pivots to break their balance.
Using your core and legs.
Elbow pushes, applying locks like Nikio, using counterclockwise movements to unwind the grip, even focusing pressure on their little finger.
The weak point of the grip, often.
And turning your whole body to break free and create space to strike. It's all about leverage and finding the weak points.
Makes sense. What about grabs higher up, like the upper arm?
Similar ideas, locking their grabbing hand down, striking pressure points at names, heart 2, triple warmer 13, spleen 21.
Whoa, specific meridian points.
Yeah, using weight shifts to off-balance them, applying hammer locks, close-range elbow strikes, again, adapting the core movement.
It really paints a picture of the down block, not as a single block, but as a foundational engine for various defensive actions.
Good way to put it. Then there's that section on preemptive techniques, using sen no sen.
Responding to threats before they fully launch.
Right. Things like someone pointing aggressively or raising a fist. The techniques involve grabbing their initiating limb,
Controlling the threat early.
striking vulnerable areas, solar plexus, jaw, neck maybe just to deter them,
Yeah.
and shifting your body defensively.
Interception. Makes sense. What about pushes? Single or double hand?
Lots here too.
So,
Deflecting the push, grabbing the wrist, fingers, collar, lapel.
redirecting and controlling.
Using pressure points. Again, body rotation, elbow counters, even chokes in some scenarios.
A wide range of responses depending on the push. Lapel grabs. Always awkward.
Techniques include elbow locks on their grabbing arm, pressure points like heart 2 again, pulling them off balance.
Using their grab against them.
Reverse punches,
Yeah.
close elbow strikes,
Really?
and grabs to the upper body with both hands.
Bear hug type situations or clothing grabs.
Yeah. Striking low, like the navel, grabbing their neck, ducking under, and hooking a leg for a takedown.
Level changes.
Dropping your weight for leverage, setting up arm bars,
Yeah.
and grabs from the rear.
Always dangerous. What's the approach there?
Using belt grabs for leverage if possible, sharp elbow strikes backwards, lowering your center of gravity.
Making yourself heavy and stable.
Circular arm movements to break grips, even arm bar reversals against their hold.
It covers a lot of ground. What about defending actual strikes, like punches?
Focuses on deflection, guiding the punch past you while striking their elbow simultaneously.
Disrupting their structure.
checking their arm to control it, and countering with punches to their side or head.
And weapons. It mentioned stick attacks.
Yeah, using the down block motion to meet the stick, immediately grabbing the wrist and the stick,
Controlling the weapon hand and the weapon.
using the stick itself as a lever for disarming, and circling movements to gain control.
So, across all these scenarios, grabs, pushes, strikes, weapons, that fundamental down block movement is the starting point, but it's heavily modified and combined with other principles.
Exactly. It really drives home the importance of not just learning techniques by rote.
You have to think critically.
The book encourages that. Look at a technique and ask, does this actually work? How well? What if they resist differently? How do small changes affect the outcome?
Moving beyond just copying shapes and understanding the why and the how.
Absolutely. Understanding the principles. Now, the book wraps up with a really neat historical appendix.
Oh, yeah.
It talks about the revival of Japanese martial arts in the late 19th century. Mentions a German doctor, Erwin von Belz.
Bales. I think I've heard the name. What was his role?
He was working in Japan at Tokyo University and was apparently struck by the poor physical condition of many students.
Interesting.
And he was also surprised that many Japanese seemed to disregard their own traditional martial arts at the time.
Kind of neglecting their own cultural heritage.
That's how he seemed to see it. So he actually started studying kendo and jiu-jitsu himself.
To understand them better.
Yeah, and to challenge the prejudice against them. He saw their value for physical education.
Did his background influence that? Being German?
The book suggests maybe it connects him to things like the German Turnverein movement, gymnastics clubs, and even student dueling traditions. Maybe he saw parallels for physical and character development.
Huh. And he promoted martial arts in Japan.
He advocated for them, yeah. And the appendix also mentions key Japanese figures in that revival, like Sakakibara doing kendo demos.
Rekindling interest.
And, of course, Kano Jigoro developing judo and getting it into the school system.
Yeah. Which goes back to that Budo evolution we talked about, shifting towards physical and spiritual development.
Right. It's just a useful bit of context, reminding us how the arts we practice today were shaped by these historical shifts.
Definitely. Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive on Clark's book.
The big takeaway seems to be the down block. Way more than meets the eye.
Absolutely. It's foundational, but incredibly adaptable. Its application depends totally on context and those subtle variations.
And understanding the history, applying ideas like the 80-20 rule to training, it makes practice smarter.
More efficient, more effective. And that concept of sen, taking the initiative, mentally and physically, that's huge in self-defense.
So maybe a final thought for the listener.
Yeah, think about this principle. One core concept, multiple interpretations, multiple applications.
How might that apply elsewhere in life?
Right. Learning skills, solving problems, understanding systems. Can you look past the simple surface? Can you see the deeper potential in basic ideas?
That's a great question to ponder. Maybe listeners will want to look up some of those pressure points mentioned.
Like an Appendix A of the book, if they have it. Or just dig deeper into the history, Funakoshi, Kano, Bales. It's fascinating stuff.
Hopefully this whole exploration gives everyone a new appreciation for just how much depth and adaptability can be packed into even the most fundamental parts of martial arts.